Namaste. My name is Preeti Upala, and I am a global thought leader and a multimedia personality. Welcome to my podcast, The Preeti Experience. Join me as I explore some of the most fascinating and crucial issues that affect our world today. I take a unique global perspective on these issues, and the very foundation of my insights is humanity and spirituality. I'm Preeti Upala, and welcome to the Preeti Experience.
Welcome back to Say What Needs Saying. I'm Zach.
I'm Brandon.
And today we are continuing the episode from last time where we discussed cultural misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So if you haven't yet listened to part 1, be sure to check that one out. We discussed culture and language, religion, place of origin, and physical attributes, and all kinds of different examples of cultural misunderstandings and misinterpretations from around the world with our friend Red from the Red's Ramblings podcast, who is still here with us for this portion. And we also have with us now several live listeners who will hopefully be able to share their stories and their experiences of this kind of experience, this sort of phenomenon that happens. People misunderstanding each other's culture and misinterpreting their intentions or beliefs based on preconceived notions and things of that nature. In addition to Red from the Red's Ramblings podcast, we also have a special guest joining us for this incredibly important conversation. We have with us Preeti Upala, a former Miss India, global thought leader, speaker, author, and Dharma ambassador. Preeti, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Namaste, Zach, and namaste to your wonderful audience. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you on the show. So I figured we would just jump in. You know, like I said, we had previously discussed a couple things. We had previously discussed language and how Americans only learn one language typically and how several other countries learn others. We talked about different hairstyles and attributes to different demographics. And we talked about religion and place of origin, all kinds of things. Obviously, you have plenty of experience across the world and dealing with people of different cultures. So I wanted to just turn it over to you and see what you think some of the biggest examples of this phenomena are, some of the biggest misunderstandings that happen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again for this opportunity. My apologies. I wish I had listened into your previous half of this show because when you mentioned religion, I speak on comparative religion. So I would have had some input, but that's okay. I can share now because they're all so connected, at least as far as my background goes. I think religion is very much a tradition, a part of our heritage and culture, and it's not anything outside of that. So it's all very intertwined in strange ways that you probably don't find here in the West. So my name is Preeti Upala, and I have a very interesting background. I grew up in the Middle East and lived all around the Middle East before moving to Europe. Then my family moved to Australia, and then I moved to the US. I have always been very much an outsider in some way, living in theocracies that are of a different faith than I am. So I've always kind of really been a minority, I guess, an ethnic as well as a religious minority my whole life. And my parents are from India. That's my heritage, but I've never lived in India. But coming to the question of cultural misappropriation, so one big, cultural, I guess, misappropriation is there's many. There's more benign ones to some that are pretty heavy. But I will start with yoga because that's a big one. So I think some of the mistruths around yoga is, number one, that it's some kind of secular activity. It's not. It is a Hindu, philosophy. Yoga is based on Vedic science and Vedic philosophy. Vedas are the holy texts of Hindus. So it's something like baptism is to Christianity, that yoga would be that to Hinduism. So to say like baptism is secular, it's got nothing to do with Christianity, and I can be baptized and I can be an atheist and get baptized, and that's beautiful. I don't think the church would accept that. They would find that quite offensive. And the same thing with so many other traditions, right? So the yoga is the same thing. It's Hinduism in motion, or Hinduism in practice, because it's based on Vedas. And so is Jyotisha, which is Vedic astrology, Ayurveda too. But Ayurveda is more of a wellness thing. So, you can study it, and obviously it's like a well-being science. But yoga specifically, I think it's if it wasn't a hot thing around the world, I don't think anybody would care. But because it's so huge, I mean, is it 25 million in this country alone that practice it? It's probably the greatest export of India to the world has been spirituality, and specifically yoga. So that's a wonderful thing. But when you break it down and you speak to some of these people, both the teachers as well as the practitioners, some of the ambassadors of some of the real yoga teachers, the master teachers, they have trained in India. They live a very dharmic life. They have incredible respect and reverence for India and Hinduism, and they understand the philosophy that goes with it. And some of them are even consider themselves Hindus, which that's fine. I have a lot of respect for those people. My problem is with the foo-foo people, the practitioners. You can't actually blame the practitioner that much, but the teachers, these people, they do a weekend crash course in yoga. They call themselves yogis. They drink, they smoke. They some of them sleep around with their yoga clients. They are narcissistic. They know very little about Hindu philosophy. And then they are touting themselves as, I'm a Mahaguru, Sadguru, whatever the hell, it's really, it's not, it'll just be a bunch of white people talking about yoga, and the knowledge is not that deep, but now they're writing books on it. They're coming up with terms and this, that, and the other. It's extremely dangerous, So that's a short thing about yoga. There are obviously many other, you can just go down the list, I think, of anything that's a Vedic science or a Vedic philosophy, and you realize that there's so much ignorance around it. And then I think the worst is a small group of like genuine bigots in this sort of industry who want to sort of make a bifurcation between yoga, the asana, the poses, and the greater faith of Hinduism. So they're running around saying it has nothing to do with Hinduism, which is not true and pretty moronic. And I think for somebody like myself, I really do find that very dangerous, because it's like the best that Hinduism has to offer, you are basically stripping it of that. And then what's left? Then you might have some things that you don't understand. And that's when you start smearing. Atheists do this a lot. They will, they want to smear every religion. They pick such obscure things, especially when it comes to Hinduism, because atheists, I can understand them having a problem with conversion and apostasy, blasphemy, jihad, radical terrorism and all of that. But then they'll pick up Hinduism and they'll say, oh, what is this Vedic philosophy and this and that, and who are Brahmins, and are they like this upper, are they like the blue-eyed people of Hinduism? Or they make all of these distortions about 6,000-7,000 year old traditions that there's a reason why they were created and why they've existed so long, and they very easily smear it. So now we're seeing a situation where you want to bring down whether it's Antifa or BLM or any of these groups, you want to bring down Churchill's statue because no doubt he was a racist. That's one thing. But now you want to bring down Mahatma Gandhi as well. And I'm sure
Right.
Nelson Mandela is next. And the actual leaders, who, look, they have their own flaws. I will be the first to criticize Gandhi. I think he was a lot of political decisions that were made were not sound for the country. And today, 70 years later, we're still suffering for it. But I think to put him in the same category as someone like Churchill, who killed millions of people, it just becomes moronic, So, but most people don't have that knowledge. They can't even debate these things even if they realize that something was not right. So I think it starts with education and awareness, not just of the West or the other, but yourself. Mm-hmm. In my own community, I think younger kids need to learn a little bit about world history and their own country's evolution over the last 5,000 years, and understand what's going on, so that I think at the very, very least, they can at least even voice out things that seem a little off,
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think, and we had talked about in the first half of this, that education is absolutely one of the critical solutions to a lot of these problems and fixing, some of these misunderstandings. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm glad actually that you started with yoga, because that's not really something that people think about
benign,
typically. Yeah. It's a little more benign. It's a little less, talked about as much as some of the other stuff. I definitely want to come back to you in a bit to talk about some of the less benign examples. But first, I think I would like to jump to another one of our participants that are in the conversation with us. We have two people here that are joining us from Iran. I'd like to turn it over to you guys now and see if you guys have anything you'd like to share as far as examples of cultural misunderstandings, of anything that you'd like to bring up for the episode.
I'll begin by saying, hey, Zach. Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having us on your show. I'm here with Mohammed. I'm David. And
hello, I'm Mohammed.
That's his voice. So thanks for having us, and thanks to the previous speaker. That was quite insightful. I think I know a few of those yoga instructors that were spoken about, but I won't go into that one. So from our side, from Iran's side, I should begin by saying I'm half English, half Iranian. Mohammed's fully Iranian, so he'll be the expert here between the two of us. But we've highlighted a few points of sort of misconception related to Iran. So we'll go through our list that we have right in front of us. So the first one is interesting, actually, because we're podcasters like yourself, and we had a show with a Japanese chap who joined us to eat sushi, Iranian-made sushi with us. And one of the questions we had for him was we asked him what his family thought about him being in Iran, and he laughed. And what did he say, Mohammed?
Well, basically he said, before I came to Iran, I didn't know the difference between Iraq and Iran, and my family doesn't know still. So basically nobody in Japan knows the difference between Iran and Iraq. And I think that's something fairly global. So a lot of people think that Iran and Iraq are either the same or pretty close. But
yeah. So that's sort of the first obvious, easy misconception that we have. Another one that we hear a lot is that Iranians are Arabs, which sort of isn't true. But again, Mohammed, help us out here.
Oh yeah, I mean, Iranians are not Arabs. A whole bunch of ethnicities, and we have a prominent Arab minority here as well, who are proud to be Arabs and Iranians at the same time. So it is both true and not true.
Yeah.
So there are other ethnicities. There are Kurds, Lurs, Baluchis, Turks, Turkmens,
real mixed bag.
Others. Yeah, actually Armenians and Jews, of course.
So the Arabs would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Mohammed, on the border sort of areas to Iraq.
Southwestern border of Iran, pretty close to Iraq, yes.
And oddly enough, somehow not wholly related, but on the sort of south coast of Iran, I was there last year, and there were African Iranians, which was bizarre. They were very dark-skinned and speaking Persian. It was quite strange for me to see. I wasn't personally aware of that.
Well, there's a long history of African Iranians being here.
Very true.
Back in the day, Persians would trade with Africa. A lot of people would come and go, as there are people in eastern coast of Africa, like Zanzibar, who are of Persian descent.
Yeah. So that's the second one. The third one that we highlighted was kind of mentioned with our previous speaker here about the Aryan race. This is probably a misconception, I think, locally. I think a lot of Iranians themselves like to consider themselves Aryan. When I hear that personally, I see that as a sort of political statement myself.
Which probably factually doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
So we know that Aryans moved to this land, but that was 2,500 years ago or more. And things have changed. The demographic has changed dramatically.
Yeah. When we got further down on the list, Mohammed, I'll mention it now, though, somewhat related to the Aryan one. Often I hear Iranians, again, misconceptions inside Iran probably, that Iranians consider themselves the smartest peoples in the world, which always makes me laugh when I hear that. But let's move on to the next one, which is Iran has nuclear weapons. Now, Mohammed, should we go here?
Well, actually, let's say nobody knows exactly whether Iran has nuclear weapons or pursuing it. I mean, everybody has their own claims, but in some parts of the world, in some communities, it is an established fact that Iran has nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And like locally, it's completely denied.
It's a bit of a can of worms in the region if we talk about nuclear weapons in the region and who has them, who's allowed to have them, who signed up to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but my hunch would be that, nuclear weapons, we wouldn't have so many sanctions if we had nuclear weapons, is my hunch about the whole thing, which makes me think there isn't any nuclear weapons. But again, we cannot confirm nor deny that one. Mohammed, next on the list is...
Oh, actually, this is what David and I always fight about, and that is Iranians speak Farsi. I mean,
Mohammed, don't do that.
As opposed to Persian.
Iranians, if you want to say like man Farsi harf mizanam, that makes sense. But it's like, I see it like this: is Persian is the English word for it. So it's like I wouldn't say I speak Deutsch. I say I speak German. So in that sense, Persian is the correct usage when using the English language. But unfortunately, there's actually probably more people, I think, prefer to say Farsi. And a lot of people who aren't Iranian as well also sort of, I would say, mistakenly use that. Mohammed, you still gonna battle that one?
I will after we're done with this live Zoom session.
I keep going to Wikipedia for this one, but it sort of says like sometimes also known, as Farsi. Don't do that. So next up on the list is
probably most of the people around the world, including Iranians, some of us, we think the Persian is a Semitic language like Arabic and Hebrew. It is not. It's a Hindu-European language, so it's way closer to Dutch or German than Arabic. That is also a misconception that changes a lot when it comes to people confusing the geography and similarities between countries like Iran and Iraq, and basically because Iran is also a predominantly Muslim nation, it makes it a little bit easier to make that mistake.
Yeah, there's also a shared script with Arabic as well, which is probably where some of the misconception comes in there. But we also have a lot of shared, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mohammed, a lot of shared language with the Turks, Azeri and Turkish up in the north west. So of course the Turkish have the sort of Latin-ish sort of script there. So there we can see some sort of departure from the Arab ways. Next up, Mohammed, we have Iran is 2,500 years old.
Yeah, well, it is not. I mean, the name Iran was official in 1935. And that is a very controversial event because, we don't want to get too deep into that, but there was a Nazi party here, pro-German Nazi party. And, because Iran, one of the perceived meanings for Iran is land of the Aryans. They, were pushing the international community to call Iran to get closer to, the German Nazi party. There are other theories as well.
Yeah. Well, I thought you were going to go off on one about the British having some influence there with that one, but we escaped that one. We had the previous speaker, I think, had a little dig at the British earlier. I didn't want to butt in about the good old Winston, who's getting a bit of a tough time in London at the moment. Who's had to board the poor bugger up. What's going on there? So next up is apparently, there's this idea about sort of agitation with Jewish people, Iranians having problems with the Jewish, and I guess that kind of comes from Israel, I guess.
Well, that comes from absolutely everywhere. So, when you look at the anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist propaganda in Iran, you never hear in Iran that we're anti-Jewish people. You're always hearing we're anti-Zionist. So there's a distinction between, different ideologies within the Jewish community here and elsewhere. But, anywhere you go around the world, you always hear people think that Iranians are anti-Jews, but most of the people are not. There are anti-Semitic people all around the world, including in Iran, but Jews have been here since the beginning of the First Empire, and they are still here. They have their lives here. Well, through time, they had their hardship just like any minority here and the nation itself, but Iranians grew together. So, and the Jewish community has been a part of this nation ever since the beginning of it.
Yeah, on the Jewish one, I've been to a couple of synagogues in Tehran and have several Jewish Iranian friends. Actually, one of our recent shows was with a Jewish Iranian girl podcast over in America. And it was great. They were giving us a sort of their view of dating from the Iranian Jewish view. We gave our view from Iran. But the Jewish thing is kind of, it's strange. Yeah, second largest Jewish community outside of Israel in the Middle East is in Iran.
The Middle East, yes.
Yeah. So, and as I say, it's, I asked people here actually about that, and I say, how do you feel about the Jewish, as one does, ask those questions at the dinner table. And, everyone's like, shrewd business people love them is normally the response. There's a huge amount of respect every time I've asked them.
So to conclude this very important section, of course, Jews have had to go through some hardship, but they're here. Most of us don't hate them.
Next up, we have weather. Now, this is one when I speak with my English friends, when I go back to England, when I mention that there's skiing going on in Tehran and that it snows, they sort of look at me like, yeah, he's a funny guy. Yeah, good one. And I don't know, maybe it's similar because I grew up not really knowing too much about Iranian culture, and I know a little bit more now. And I was a bit surprised as well myself, because I had pictures that are shown on the news, and therefore thinking it was quite arid, desert-like. Probably Iraq was what I had in mind. But, I was quite surprised to see snow-capped mountains, quite sort of, up to midway through the year, and, quite heavy snow in the winter. Good enough.
Which is, kind of partly true, because a 2-hour drive will take you from the desert, to the mountain on the north of Tehran, and you can go to the ski resort and ski in April.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
And Europeans do. Yeah. I've seen Europeans who travel just specifically to go to Dizin is one of the places, and Shemshak.
Also Tochal, which is like 20 minutes drive from where we are right now.
Yeah. There's no snow on the top of the mountains, I think, at the moment.
Well, not at the moment.
Give it 5 or 6 days and it's going to be there. We're hoping to head down to the south to get some sun, actually, because it's getting quite cold in Tehran at the moment. So we're going to do a couple of podcast shows down on an island in the south, so get some sun there. So anyway, next up on the list, have we got time? Are we okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. Well, we've only got 2, so we'll just do them really slow then. We'll just use it's just so guys, how's it going? How's the podcast going? Got 2 minutes. Tell us about yourselves. No, we'll use the time. You can talk about yourselves later. Okay, so the next one is women, and as far as the sort of perception or misunderstandings about women being oppressed in the nation. Now, we need to tread carefully here, Mohammed, because Mohammed and I don't identify as women. At least last I checked with Mohammed, he didn't identify as a woman. That might have changed. But,
not until today.
Okay.
But about a very important subject, that is women in Iran. The conception here, the misconception about Iranian women is that they're weak. well, they might be oppressed in some communities more or less, but actually women are the dominant factor here in families and in the society. There are many strong and successful women. Of course, there is oppression from other women, from society, from the government, from the law. I don't know, just like from all around. But still, like Iranian women are strong, resilient, always hopeful, and they play one of the biggest roles in our society, always.
Yeah, and we're not plugging our podcast too much by saying, oh, we are. Okay. That we also had a sort of popular cafe owner come on one of our shows and talk about sort of the culture and also about how she's fared over the 18 years of working as a sort of cafe owner, a successful art gallery owner. And yeah, she's done really well. She was really great. So next up, last one. Okay, how long have we got? 30 seconds. Let's go. Mohammed, religion.
Well, there's always this misconception that Iranians are either religious zealots, hardcore Muslims, or anti-regime, anti-Islamic dissidents. That is absolutely not true. Of course, both of those people exist. Most of Iranians, they come from a 1,000-year-old background of a secular nation with many religions and sects. I mean, well, majority of Iranians are Shia Muslims, but Shiaism is broken into many different sects. I could name a few. Let's skip that. But I gotta say, Iranians as a nation grew up to be pragmatic, mostly secular and tolerant of each other. But of course, there are hardcore religious zealots as well.
Mohammed, I would just add a little bit more to that. Would you agree with me in saying that kind of a little bit pagan in parts, and maybe that's sort of the Zoroastrian roots?
Oh, absolutely. And well, a lot of traditions in Shia Islam is perceived by some scholars to be a pagan response to the fundamental Islam as well. That is something that is still. It requires a lot of study, of course, which is probably not very welcome here at this point, but I'm pretty sure the scholarship is open. Well, at the same time, of course, Zoroastrianism is a predominant. Actually, it is a very important part of the Iranian history. So yeah, it is considered also paganism.
And just a little tiny thing to add at the end here. That is, there's a heck of a lot of yoga instructors in Tehran.
Yep.
Just saying. It's taking off here. We hope that's helped provide you with some, interesting array of misunderstandings from the point of view of us in Iran. If there's any questions, let us know. If not, let's move on to the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing everything, man. That was awesome. And you guys gave me
thorough. Yeah,
you guys gave some great perspective. I guess, yeah. If anyone has any questions for these two, for David and Mohammed, we'll open it up for that. And if not, then we can move on to if anyone else has something to share, or we can move back to Preeti to discuss some of the less benign examples for India or Hinduism as well.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for sharing your views and your backgrounds. That was very enlightening. So I myself am a third culture kid like Preeti. I'm South Asian and I was born and grew up in the Middle East. And I have a Farsi name, so I guess I relate to a lot of you. But as someone who lives in the US right now, I just wanted to add another perspective, which is sort of cultural misunderstandings about the US that foreigners have. So these are things that I had as misconceptions before I came to the US, and now they've been cleared up. But a lot of my family back home and other people abroad have sort of these misconceptions. I'll just share a handful in the interest of time. So the first one is wealth. So before I came to the US, I thought everyone was very wealthy and there aren't any poor people living in the US. So as soon as I remember, so I sort of landed in Boston, and my first sort of, my uncle was driving me to get the most American thing possible, which is pizza. And I just noticed a homeless man with a sign saying that he's a US veteran and he's seeking some money. And I was just so confused. And that was sort of my first, I guess it was very jarring to me to see a homeless person and who's poor and a veteran in the US. So my conceptions of that everyone is wealthy was shattered. And of course, over the years, I've learned that there's a lot poor people in the US. Second sort of misconception about the US that I had was it's very cold everywhere. That's not the case. Although I do live in the Midwest, which is extremely cold. I've visited other parts of the country, such as Arizona and Colorado, which do get cold, but they have very desert-like landscapes as well. During summers, they get pretty hot. Another misconception was that Americans only eat fast food. So I get this a lot from my relatives back home who say, "Oh, like you must be eating like burgers and fries like every meal." And I myself, from seeing Hollywood and all these sort of icons from back home, thought that was the case, but unfortunately, it's not. America is very diverse in terms of food. But it is partially true. The stereotype partially is true because you see fast food chains everywhere on highways, interstate highways, and elsewhere. So yeah, and the final one that I'll share is that all American colleges are like American Pie, which is sort of my misconception coming in, is that it's just full of frats and large parties everywhere, which was not the case. When I came to college here in the US, I went to a pretty chill school, which didn't have sort of these aspects. So yeah, just wanted to share some other perspective of what cultural misconceptions are there about the US abroad.
Definitely. One thing that I 100% will agree is I'm from America, I'm from New York, and I too, before going to college, thought it was like American Pie, and I went for 4 years, and I still think college is like American Pie. So I definitely can agree on that. Some of the comments that we got in the chat, it says, is there any differences between Christian sects like Catholic, Protestant, to the divisions you mentioned? Like any key differences?
And that one was to David and Muhammad. Yep.
Right, that was a reference to David and Muhammad in regards to the vets aren't necessarily vets, Google, stolen valor, but often they are trying to play on people's guilt.
Yeah.
Should we come in with the answer to the Christian one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in Iran, we have, like most of Christians here, are Orthodox Christians from Armenia and like Eastern denominations, Greeks, and there are Catholics here. And they're Assyrians. Well, of course, they have their divisions, but they're minimized because they're a minority. Like each of them, it makes them closer to each other as opposed to other nations where are like Christian majorities. Therefore, those differences might cause clashes. But here, it's more like disagreements and like different practices and traditions, and that's it. They go to each other's churches. Nothing major.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for answering that. Yeah, and thank you to the last speaker, too, for sharing. It's good to get some perspective on America, too, because I'm sure that while we're talking about all the misconceptions about cultures around the world, you know, it's true that people have misconceptions about America as well. And we touched on that a little bit in the first half, too, you know, about people having preconceived notions of America and our political leanings. You know, Red had brought up in the previous episode about how some of the people that he brings on to interview are a bit hesitant because they're unsure of what his political affiliation or leanings are. And especially right now with how incendiary and polarizing American politics has become, it turns off a lot of people. And even not knowing, you know, making the assumption that someone holds a particular view for some people is enough to dissuade them from being fully comfortable coming on and talking with an American. So we appreciate you bringing up those misconceptions about America too. And I can definitely, as an American, I can agree. I think that you're right in all of your observations. I think it sounds like that was the only other question for David and Muhammad. But otherwise, Preeti, if you don't mind jumping back to you, I was hoping to delve into a little more of the other examples that you had in mind. We started with yoga, but I'm sure that you have other things that you were hoping to discuss with us.
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity. I'm so happy that my two Iranian speaker friends had a great method of just jotting down 10 different examples, and they briefly touched on them. I think what I did was the opposite. I took one and I really expanded it. So while they were speaking, I actually had to go get a pen and jot down, and they just came to me. And it's ironic that some of them are very interrelated because these two, the Persian civilization and the Hindu civilization, there is a lot of there's been civilizational connection for a long time. And in fact, a lot of Iranians fled to India during the persecution, and of course they're called the Parsis. I think it was the only country that they probably were accepted and totally welcomed. So, so many hundreds of years later, we still have this very thriving Parsi community, and some of them have obviously married into Indian. So you have a mixture of Indian and Persian, beautiful people, really amazing. So yes, I have several other distortions, and I'll be very brief with them because I think there are some really meaty ones. And I work as a geopolitical commentator and analyst for TV and radio. So I'm going to put that hat on because some of these are related to geopolitics. Sorry, they're sort of very political in that way. So first one is still it's 2020 and people still don't realize that Gautama Buddha was Indian and that he was actually a Hindu. For some reason, the depiction of Buddha is, he looks Asian, he looks Oriental, and I don't know how, maybe it was a Chinese, because obviously it's spread there, and then they took it to, they took it to other parts of the world. But for some reason, the Oriental depiction of Buddha is much more prominent than how he would have actually probably looked, which is like some Indian person, thousands of years ago. So that's one. The second one is people think that Hinduism is the predominant religion in India. Well, yes, 85% is still Hindu after so many years. However, people don't realize that it's that 5 out of the top 10 religions around the world originated in India. So it's a very religious country in a way, with various forms of looking at the truth. Most of these are dharmic, but still, one of the oldest Jewish synagogues in the world happens to be in Kerala, and one of the oldest mosques is also in India. So it's an incredibly syncretic country that has really just embraced everything. And there is this talk about Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European. I think when the historians at this stage, they have done the history of the linguistics and so on, they found that it's actually the Sanskrit was the mother language, and then you get the Germanic and all the other languages too, which is why there's such similarities. I mean, when you look at even Lithuanian and Latvian, even their language, even the way that they write, the written script is so similar to Sanskrit or South Indian languages. You think it's the same language. It's interesting the influence of it, which brings me, I think, to the most contentious issue of this Aryan invasion theory. My other speakers brought it up. I do want to touch on that because they mentioned something like a lot of Iranians probably think that their roots come from the Aryan race or whatever. You know what? Newsflash, there is no Aryan race. There is no such thing as Aryan. There is only Arya, which means noble. And that is in the Vedas. That is a Sanskrit word. Arya was used to define people in India, the greater India, Akhand Bharat, we say. It got distorted over time. You have to really look up the German Indologists, people like Max Muller and other such people who, they were very enamored by the Vedas, but they were not Sanskrit speakers as such. They just looked at translations, and then they, formed some of these theories. And that's why they got so many things wrong, including things like caste system and who are the Brahmins and even our symbols like swastika and all of that. It is true that we had people from all around the world, especially the Caucasus and the steppe area, that came to India many thousands of years ago. However, the Aryan invasion theory, the main crux of that concept is that Vedic philosophy, the Vedas, Hinduism, I think even Sanskrit, is not indigenous to India. They claim that it came from these white people from steppes or Caucasus, which is completely false. It is indigenous to India. So there's the other theory is the out of India theory, which is where it traveled from India to the rest of the world, which makes a lot of sense. I'm not denying that people from other nations came to India. Maybe there was even mingling. but our philosophy is indigenous to India. So that the Aryan invasion theory is very much debunked now, thank God. And I can't believe for so many decades it was the accepted norm, in academia.
100%. I greatly appreciate it. One thing I took, and I hate the basis of how I'm asking this question because I don't want to come off as ignorant, but in college I took, Eastern religions class, yep. And they separated the different concepts of the Buddha in regards to the more, mainland China, the bigger, overweight Buddha compared to the more slender. Could you at least differentiate the two, at least from my understanding? Because I assume that
that's a good point. I think it's that's a Chinese connection. Uh-huh. That's a depiction that comes. I think in China, when you go to or maybe even Tibetan Buddhism. But so there is a difference between, you have the various types of Buddhism. So Indian Buddhists are in their thinking, beliefs, behavior are quite different and follow the actual Buddhism, and there's that Nalanda University connection too. And you have got to look at the Dalai Lama's recent interviews. So I think on his 85th birthday, he keeps saying, he only here to share India's spiritual technology to the world. He always stresses that all of this was ancient Indian thought and ancient Indian spirituality that obviously he's now a caretaker of, which is a wonderful thing. I mean, he's an Indian citizen now. He's been, in exile for 60 odd years, and he's a son of India, so to speak. But look up his interviews. He's phenomenal in explaining even the origins of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the closest to the original source, which is, in India. Back to your question, I think it's just a depiction. I don't see, and obviously they have different avatars of Buddha, different forms. And then, of course, you have Kuan Yin, but she's a female sort of goddess, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you for clearing that up. I was just, there's just so many aspects of, at least in the American education system, you're not sure which aspects are of truth or just things that pass down or, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
If anyone else has any questions for Preeti and the things that she had discussed, feel free to, again, either unmute yourself and bring them up or feel free to drop them in the chat.
Well, I guess I have to be honest. When David and Muhammad came on, I was shocked to my core. The register in their voice was so sonically awakening. I was like, wow, am I listening to like a sleepy time? Like this, it was just perfect intonation. A lot of Americans would have assumed whatever stereotype we've been fed within throughout our media. So I must admit, I had to check myself, and I was like, you can't have a concept like this or a podcast like this and then have preconceived notions. But granted, I'm still a product of my environment, and
Sure. Yeah. And I felt the same way, right? It was shocking, right? Especially the one, I don't remember, I think it was David had said that he was, I believe, British and Iranian.
Right.
And so it caught me off guard at first. And, one of the things that we had talked about with Red early on was language and accents. And, it's something that it's natural to make an assumption, right? It's natural to assume based on your previous experiences and your previous knowledge and things like that. It's something that obviously we all need to work on getting better at, but, it was interesting, and I was really glad that they joined us. They wound up logging off because it's actually super late, or rather early, I suppose, over where they're at. I believe it's about 1 a.m., if I'm not mistaken there. So I was really happy to have them join us and, and have them share their experiences as well. We did get a comment really quick. Preeti, it's for you. It says, are there any Indian concepts and misconceptions of America?
Oh, that's interesting. Look, we have a very positive image of America. I would actually maybe frame it as in the opposite, where people think that America is the answer to all the problems, that a green card is basically your passport to enlightenment or something like that. And it's only when you come here that you realize it's not. So I think the misconceptions that maybe Indians have is that it's this paradise, and then they come here and they realize, no, it has a lot of problems as well. And you must appreciate, I think, where you come from and your roots. That's personally me living here for so many years. That's what I take away from my time here.
Thank you again for joining us, everyone. This was Preeti Uppala.
Yeah.
We were super happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much. If you were tuning in earlier, the two gentlemen that were joining us from Iran, they unfortunately had to go because it was very late, or very early rather, in their time. But they also gave me a brief plug to give. So if anyone is interested in learning about Iran or Iranians and getting the Iranian take on things, be sure to check them out too. Their podcast is called Ask an Iranian. And so you can find them anywhere that you find podcasts just like us. They also have a website that is www.askaniranian.com. And so we were super happy to have them join us as well. They brought some fascinating perspective about Iran and about some of the cultural misunderstandings and misinterpretations about Iran in general. And we were happy to have their perspective as well. So definitely check them out, and hope to see you all again next time.
Woohoo!